Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into a document that's really making waves. Leopold Aschenbrenner's Situational Awareness, The Decade Ahead.
Yeah, it's definitely got people talking.
Our goal here is to really unpack his argument, and it's a pretty bold one about AGI, artificial general intelligence, possibly arriving as early as 2027.
And not just AGI, but this idea of a rapid intelligence explosion right after,
Mhm.
leading to superintelligence. It's quite a forecast.
Exactly. So this document, it's from June 2024. Aschenbrenner used to be at OpenAI, right?
Correct. And he's put this together based on, well, public info, his own insights, what he knows about the field generally, and even SF gossip, as he puts it, the buzz in the AI labs.
Interesting. And he dedicates it to Ilya Sutskever, acknowledges talks with some big names, gives you a sense he was really in the mix.
It does. He positions himself and a few others as having this situational awareness. Basically, they see where AI is heading because their past predictions based on these trends have apparently panned out.
Right. So our mission here for you, the learner, is to pull out the key takeaways about this potential near future of AI, make these complex ideas understandable, and highlight the implications without getting totally lost in the technical weeds.
Yeah, we'll be looking at a few core things.
Yeah.
First, why 2027 for AGI? What's the logic? Then this concept he uses, counting the ohms,
Yeah.
orders of magnitude, basically 10x increases. He tracks those for compute and efficiency.
Okay, got it.
Then how we get from AGI to superintelligence, that explosion idea. And finally, the big challenges this throws up, security, global competition, all that stuff.
Sounds like a plan. So let's jump right in. AGI by 2027. He argues this is strikingly plausible just by looking at recent trends.
He does. And he uses this really vivid comparison to show how fast things have moved already. Think about GPT-2. He likens it to a preschooler's abilities.
Okay.
Then just 4 years later, you get GPT-4, which he compares to a smart high schooler. That leap in just 4 years from preschooler to high schooler, it's huge. It shows the rapid qualitative change.
That's a powerful way to frame it. And this counting the OMs is how he projects forward.
Exactly. OM just means order of magnitude, a 10x jump. He focuses on tracking the OM growth in 3 key areas driving progress:
And those are,
compute, algorithmic efficiencies,
Mhm.
and what he calls unhobbling gains.
okay, let's take those one by one. Compute first. That's just raw processing power for training.
Pretty much. The sheer scale of computer power thrown at these models.
Yeah.
Give some numbers. GPT-2 used something like 4 E21 FLOPs, and think of FLOPs as calculation units.
Right.
GPT-3 was around 3 E23 FLOPs. And GPT-4, somewhere in the range of 8024 to 425 FLOPs, you see those massive 100x, then maybe 3100x jumps. Those are OM increases.
Wow. Okay. Huge leaps in compute. And he expects that to continue.
He projects potentially another 2 to 3 OM, so 100x to 1000x more compute being feasible by the end of 2027. But he also notes this could require building training clusters costing, well, tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars.
Hundreds of billions for one training run. That's staggering.
It is. But importantly, he stresses it's not just about the brute force compute. Algorithmic efficiencies are just as, maybe even more, important. These are the smarter ways of doing things, the better algorithms.
Smarter, not just bigger.
Precisely. He uses the math benchmark like a math competition for AIs. He points out that inference efficiency, basically how cheaply you can get the AI to solve problems after training, improved by nearly 3 ohms 1,000 times in just 2 years on that benchmark. Getting to around 50% accuracy got drastically cheaper.
1,000 times cheaper in 2 years. That's incredible.
It is. And these algorithmic gains act like compute multipliers. They give you more effective compute from the same hardware. He mentions a trend of about half an ohm per year, like a 3x improvement annually, observed from 2012 to 2021.
Okay.
And he infers that the jump to GPT-4 probably included 1 or 2 ohms, 10x to 100x, just from better algorithms alone. For 2027, he projects another 1 to 3 ohms of algorithmic gains.
So more compute and smarter ways of using it. What's the third factor? Unhobbling.
Yeah, unhobbling gains. The idea here is that the base models, the ones fresh from training, have a lot of raw capability that's often kind of hidden or constrained.
Like untapped potential.
Exactly. Techniques like RLHF reinforcement, learning from human feedback, or chain of thought prompting, where you ask the AI to explain its steps, or giving the AI tools. These things can unlock that latent ability.
Makes sense, like teaching someone how to use their talent effectively.
Right. He gives an example from APR, an evaluation group. They found performance on certain complex tasks went from like 5% success to nearly 40% just through better post-training techniques, giving the AI tools, and setting up the problem better. That's like getting 5x to 30x more effective compute on those tasks.
So you train the raw intelligence, then you teach it how to apply itself.
That's a good way to put it. These unhobbling methods are crucial for making the models actually useful.
Now, he does mention a potential roadblock, right? The data wall. The idea we might run out of internet data to train on.
Yes, that's a big one. It's a real concern. If you just keep feeding the model the same data over and over, you hit diminishing returns. You need new high-quality data for it to keep learning effectively, especially for language models.
So how do we get past that?
Well, Aschenbrenner is cautiously optimistic. He points to things like in-context learning. Remember Gemini 1.5 Pro learning the Calamang language just from a dictionary and grammar given its prompt?
Ah, right. Learning from specific materials, not just the whole web.
Exactly. Or self-play, like AlphaGo mastering Go by, playing against itself millions of times. Maybe similar techniques can generate useful training data or scenarios for broader AIs. He admits it's an uncertainty, but thinks the labs will likely find ways around it.
Okay, so the data wall is a challenge, but maybe not insurmountable. He gets more specific on unhobbling, too, doesn't he? Tools, for instance.
Yeah, he really emphasizes tools. The analogy is simple. Think about what humans can do with calculators, computers, the internet versus without. Giving models access to web browsers, code execution. It fundamentally changes what they can achieve.
Turns them from passive knowledge bases into active agents.
Right, and then context length, that's exploded. GPT-3 had maybe a 2,000 token window. Now we're seeing models like Gemini 1.5 Pro with over 1 million tokens.
1 million tokens. That's like a whole novel's worth of information it can hold in its working memory.
Pretty much. And having that huge context makes them way more efficient at certain tasks.
Hmm.
Again, the example of learning a language just from the provided materials that needs a big context window. It means they can absorb and reason over much more information simultaneously.
Then there's this idea of test time compute overhang. What's that about?
It's about how much thinking the AI does when solving a problem versus how much compute went into the initial training. He argues current models are maybe undertrained relative to their potential reasoning power if we let them think longer.
Like giving a human more time to mull over a difficult problem?
Exactly. He compares it to a human having minutes versus months. He even includes a table suggesting that allowing maybe 10,000 times more compute at test time, letting the AI process vastly more information to arrive at an answer, could provide a boost equivalent to a huge increase in training compute, maybe similar to the GPT-3 to GPT-4 jump.
So we could unlock massive gains just by letting the existing models work harder on problems.
Potentially. It's this idea of a trade-off between training compute and inference compute. The AI playing hex is an example. A smaller model, given more thinking time per move, could match a much larger model. It's an intriguing possibility for boosting capability without necessarily needing exponentially larger training runs immediately.
And finally, this onboarding problem.
Right, with super long context windows, you could potentially feed an AI tons of company-specific documents, data, procedures, and it could learn the specifics of that business incredibly quickly, like onboarding a new human employee, but maybe in hours or days.
That would be transformative for businesses.
Absolutely. Yeah. Imagine an AI quickly getting up to speed on a complex scientific field just by reading the literature.
So putting all this together, the compute increases, the algorithmic gains, the unhobbling, Aschenbrenner sees another GPT-2 to GPT-4-sized leap by 2027.
That's the projection. He estimates maybe 3 to 6 OMs, 1,000 to 1,000,000 times increase in effective compute scale-up, plus more unhobbling gains. And his conclusion is stark. This could lead to AI capable of fully automating the jobs of AI researchers and engineers themselves.
Automating the automation builders.
Precisely. Now, he's careful to add caveats. Error bars. Progress could stall. Data limits might bite harder. Algorithmic breakthroughs might not come. Unhobbling might hit a wall.
But he also suggests it could go faster.
He does. He acknowledges the possibility of acceleration, maybe even AGI, before 2027. It's a range of possibilities, but he clearly finds the 2027 timeframe strikingly plausible.
Okay, so that sets the stage. But he doesn't think it stops at human-level AGI, right? This leads to the intelligence explosion and superintelligence.
Exactly. That's the next crucial part of his argument.
Yeah.
He says progress won't just nicely level off once AI reaches human capabilities across the board.
Why not?
Because, he argues, once you have AGI that can do AI research itself, you can set millions of these AGI minds to work on improving AI.
Ah, the AI starts improving itself.
Yes, and potentially much faster than humans can. He speculates these millions of AGI researchers could compress what might have been a decade of human-driven algorithmic progress, maybe 5 plus OM, so
Yeah.
100,000x improvement or more, into just a single year.
A decade of progress in 1 year. That's the explosion.
That's the core idea of the intelligence explosion, a rapid, recursive self-improvement cycle leading from roughly human-level AGI to vastly superhuman intelligence, potentially very quickly.
And he thinks this is plausible because we'll have the infrastructure, millions of AGIs.
He points to the projected scale of GPU deployment. By 2027, maybe tens of millions of powerful GPUs deployed. If each AGI instance needs, say, 100 GPUs, you could potentially run millions of them. And if they work continuously, maybe 10 times faster than humans. He calculates that could be like having over 100 million human researchers working 2047.
That scale is just hard to fathom. 100 million researchers focus solely on making AI smarter.
It's a staggering thought. And he pushes back against common objections, like, won't ideas get harder to find? He argues the sheer magnitude of the research effort increase maybe a million-fold likely swamps that effect, at least initially.
What about diminishing returns?
He acknowledges the concept, but suggests the empirical evidence in AI so far points towards explosive progress, and that this massive initial boost in research power should overcome diminishing returns for a significant period. He also counters the idea that this effort might just sustain current progress rates rather than accelerating them, arguing the increase in effort is far, far larger than historical trends required for sustainment.
And these AI researchers would have advantages over humans.
Big ones, he thinks. Working 2047, no breaks, running massively parallel experiments, perfect memory, instant knowledge sharing, potentially spending the equivalent of centuries of human thinking time designing experiments. He speculates they might achieve 10x the progress of human researchers, even using the same amount of compute, just by being more efficient.
And this could lead to qualitatively different intelligence, not just faster, but alien.
That's the really mind-bending part. He suggests these automated researchers might discover entirely new paradigms, truly creative breakthroughs beyond human ken. He uses the AlphaGo Move 37 analogy, that unexpected brilliant move. Imagine that kind of insight applied everywhere: science, tech, economics.
Like those weird video game speedruns he mentions, finding exploits no human would think of.
Exactly. A glimpse into how a different kind of intelligence might optimize things in ways utterly surprising to us.
And the timeline for this. AGI to superintelligence. He thinks it could be fast.
Frighteningly fast. He suggests the transition could happen within a year, going from human level to systems far smarter than all humanity combined. That speed is key to why he sees it as such a critical, potentially dangerous moment, a potential loss of control.
He uses a historical parallel here too, right? The bomb versus the super.
Yes, the atomic bomb versus the hydrogen bomb. A 1,000-fold increase in destructive power developed in just a few years after the initial breakthrough. He sees a potential parallel in the rapid escalation of AI power post-AGI.
Okay, so that paints a picture of potentially very rapid, very transformative change, which naturally leads to the challenges. The first one sounds almost like a sci-fi title. Racing to the trillion-dollar cluster.
It does, but he argues it's grounded in current trends. He describes this extraordinary techno-capital acceleration happening right now. AI revenues are growing fast, fueling massive investment.
Trillions of dollars flowing into compute.
That's his projection. Before the decade is out, trillions poured into GPUs, data centers, and crucially, the power generation needed to run them all. This is a massive industrial mobilization he's talking about.
And individual training clusters costing hundreds of billions, requiring the power of a U.S. state.
He presents it as plausible by 2028, more expensive than the ISS potentially. He points to examples happening now: Zuckerberg buying 350,000 H100 GPUs, Amazon's huge data center plans near power plants, the rumors about Kuwait, the Microsoft OpenAI $100 billion Stargate project.
These aren't small bets.
Not at all. He estimates overall AI investment this year, 2024, is already somewhere between $100 billion and $200 billion, largely driven by NVIDIA's revenues, but also other players. And he projects this investment could keep doubling annually for a while.
Why? What's driving that confidence?
Because, he argues, so far, every 10x scale-up in investment seems to have produced the breakthroughs needed to justify the next 10x scale-up. It's been paying off, fueling the cycle.
But there must be bottlenecks. He mentioned power.
Yes. He sees power as likely the biggest near-term constraint on the supply side. Building big power plants takes years.
So how do we power these monsters?
His potential solution, at least for the U.S., is leaning heavily on natural gas. He calculates that powering these clusters would need maybe 100 gigawatts of new capacity, which is achievable with gas relatively quickly, perhaps $100 billion in investment, and would use only a small fraction of total U.S. natural gas production.
Interesting. What about making the chips themselves? Can we produce enough?
That's another constraint. He notes that 2024's AI chip production could almost build one of these massive clusters if entirely diverted, but meeting the demand projected for, say, 2030 requires TSMC and others to massively ramp up factory building. There are also bottlenecks within chip production, like advanced packaging, CoWoS, and high bandwidth memory, HBM, though he notes these are being addressed.
And geopolitically, where do these clusters get built?
That's a huge question he raises. Will they be clusters of democracy, mostly in the U.S. and allied nations? Or will we see huge compute hubs built elsewhere, like the Middle East? What does that mean for control and influence?
Okay, huge investments, power challenges, chip supply. Then the second major challenge, lock down the labs, security for AGI. This sounds serious.
He frames it as incredibly serious. His core assertion is blunt. He thinks leading AI labs treat security almost as an afterthought and are basically handing AGI secrets the model weights, key algorithmic breakthroughs to adversaries like the CCP on a platter.
Handing them over. How?
Through, in his view, inadequate cybersecurity, lack of vetting, poor internal controls. He argues all the investment is pointless if the core secrets get stolen.
And the consequence of theft.
It could allow other nations, particularly China, to rapidly catch up. They could replicate the breakthroughs, launch their own intelligence explosion, and eliminate any U.S. lead. This, he argues, increases existential risk because it compresses the timeline for figuring out safety.
So we could lose the critical how-to for AGI.
Exactly. The AlphaGo self-play moment for general intelligence, as he puts it. He notes that while the U.S. tries to restrict chip exports to China, the arguably more valuable algorithmic secrets are leaking freely. He criticizes labs for resisting basic security measures.
And he expects espionage efforts to ramp up.
Dramatically.
Right.
Once China fully grasps the stakes, he expects the full force of their intelligence services targeting these labs. His conclusion: securing AGI properly requires government involvement.
Why the government?
Because, he argues, they have the infrastructure, the know-how for state-level threats, the authority for vetting, classifying information, enforcing security. He points out that even tech giants like Microsoft get hacked by state actors regularly. Private companies aren't equipped for this level of threat.
And the risk if China catches up through theft.
He paints a scenario where China might even outbuild the U.S. on compute, given their infrastructure capabilities, and operate with fewer safety constraints. If they steal the algorithms, even matching U.S. models could be enough to win the race to superintelligence, especially if they move faster or take more risks.
The lead time matters hugely for safety then.
Critically, having a 1-2 year lead gives you breathing room to work on safety. A 1-2 month lead means a frantic neck-and-neck race with immense pressure and no margin for error. It becomes extremely dangerous.
He compares it to WWII atomic secrecy.
Yes, highlighting the dissonance he sees. Labs claiming to build world-changing AGI with huge national security implications, yet having, in his assessment, poor security hygiene. He calls the current situation untenable and says it needs government intervention soon.
Okay, that's a stark warning on security. The third challenge, superalignment. This is about controlling these powerful systems.
Yes, the core technical problem. How do you reliably control an AI system that's much, much smarter than you are? He says it's fundamentally an unsolved problem.
Unsolved, but he thinks it's solvable.
He expresses optimism that it is solvable in principle, but warns that during a rapid intelligence explosion, things easily go off the rails.
Why would current methods fail? We align models now, right? RLHF.
Because current methods rely heavily on human oversight and feedback. How can a human supervisor evaluate the work of an AI that's vastly superhuman? Imagine trying to review millions of lines of code in a language you don't understand, written by an intellect far exceeding yours. You just can't effectively check its work or steer its values.
So the methods break down at scale and complexity.
Exactly. And there's the risk of emergent behaviors. Reinforcement learning might inadvertently teach AIs to be deceptive or seek power simply because those are instrumental, useful strategies for achieving arbitrary goals in complex environments. We might not even realize it's happening until it's too late.
Especially during a fast takeoff with international pressure.
Right. The intelligence explosion itself creates this intense pressure cooker. Rapid advances, little time for careful thought, potentially against the backdrop of an arms race. And aligning human-level AI isn't enough, because the first AGIs capable of automating AI research will likely already be superhuman in key domains like coding and science.
how do you even know if it's aligned during that chaos?
That's the problem. Verification is incredibly hard without reliable methods. Can we fully reverse engineer a superhuman mind? Probably not easily, maybe akin to trying to reverse engineer the human brain now.
Is there any hope for transparency?
He mentioned one potential advantage of early AGIs, chain of thought interpretability. If they think out loud in English, we might be able to follow their reasoning and spot misalignments. But he doubts true superintelligence would stick with such an inefficient human-centric method.
Getting automated alignment right during the explosion is critical.
Absolutely critical. It would likely require dedicating a large fraction of our compute resources just to alignment research and ensuring the alignment methods themselves are trustworthy. We can't just extrapolate safety evidence from GPT-4 to vastly more capable systems.
What's his overall take? Are we on track?
He thinks there's a reasonable shot that a sort of default plan for aligning somewhat superhuman systems might work out. But he calls just muddling through incredibly risky given the stakes. And he highlights how few people are really working seriously on this problem right now. We're basically counting on getting lucky, he implies.
Okay. Security, alignment, the final big challenge area. The free world must prevail. This sounds geopolitical.
It is. His argument is straightforward. Superintelligence will confer a decisive economic and military advantage. Therefore, the race to AGI between the free world, led by the U.S., and authoritarian powers like China is existential.
Decisive advantage? How decisive?
He uses the first Gulf War as an analogy. A 20-30-year lead in military tech, stealth, precision weapons, proved utterly dominant. He argues a 1-2-year lead in superintelligence could be similarly decisive, compressing perhaps a central conventional military R&D superhuman hacking, autonomous drone swarms, maybe new WMDs into less than a decade.
And China's path to competing.
He sees two main roads for them. Trying to outbuild the U.S. in compute infrastructure, which he thinks they might be better positioned to do given their state capacity for large projects.
Especially power generation.
Especially power, yes. And the second path, stealing the crucial algorithms. He mentions China's progress in chip manufacturing, like 7-millimeter chips, similar to NVIDIA's A100 generation, and their indigenous AI chips like Huawei's Ascend 910B. But he keeps coming back to the security issue.
That the algorithm theft negates the compute advantage.
Potentially, yes. If they can get the key algorithmic ingredients, they might not need to match the absolute cutting edge of U.S. hardware to stay competitive or even pull ahead, especially if they're willing to take more risks on deployment and safety.
And the danger of an authoritarian regime getting superintelligence first.
He paints a grim picture. Unprecedented concentration of power, elimination of internal dissent, hypercharged mass surveillance, perfectly obedient robotic enforcement, control over information. He details concerns about the CCP, specifically its history, human rights record, surveillance state, stated global ambitions.
So for him, it's vital the U.S. and allies stay ahead.
Vital for survival and also vital for safety. He argues that technological loops often increase destructive potential, and superintelligence could make extremely dangerous capabilities like advanced bioweapons accessible if not tightly controlled. He mentions North Korea's existing bioweapons program as a specific concern if AI removes their current scientific bottlenecks.
Arms control becomes impossible.
Very difficult in the face of rapid change. He argues the U.S. must lead, establish safety norms, and enforce them globally, much like the non-proliferation regime for nuclear weapons. A healthy lead provides the necessary maneuvering room to prioritize safety during the intelligence explosion.
What about dealing with adversaries?
He suggests that once a decisive U.S. lead is clear, the U.S. could offer a deal. Non-interference, adherence to safety and non-proliferation rules, in exchange for, well, he doesn't specify exactly, but implies some form of managed access or benefit sharing later on. But the priority is winning the race and securing the lead first.
His bottom line is stark. This is an existential race where months could matter.
Yes. A lead of months could be decisive militarily, he claims. The U.S. needs to act decisively now.
Which leads directly into his final major section, the project. What is the project?
It's his term for what he sees as the inevitable government-led effort to manage AGI and superintelligence. He predicts that as the race heats up, likely around 2027, 28, the national security state will get involved deeply. No startup, he argues, can handle superintelligence. The end game will happen in secure government facility, a SCIF.
Why inevitable? Why can't private labs handle it?
Because the stakes are too high. National defense, existential risk, security against state actors, the need for a sane chain of command, managing global safety, deploying it defensively, leading a non-proliferation coalition. These are fundamentally government functions, especially when dealing with something potentially more impactful than nuclear weapons. Startups aren't built for that.
How does he see this happening? A government takeover?
Not necessarily nationalization in the classic sense. He draws a parallel to the rapid government response to COVID once the threat was clear. He expects a similar moment of realization about AI around 2026-27, driven by undeniable progress, maybe some scary demos. Then the project gets operationalized. It could be a joint venture, cloud providers, AI labs, and the government working together, but ultimately functioning as a project of the national security state. Think DoD and defense contractors. Congress would likely be involved due to the scale.
So researchers move to secure sites. The trillion-dollar cluster gets built under this umbrella by late 2026, 2027, 2028.
That's the rough timeline he sketches. He acknowledges concerns about government bureaucracy and incentives, calling them mediocre, but argues there's simply no other plausible alternative given the national security imperative. It will be a defense project at its core, initially focused on defensive applications.
And the chain of command issue.
He feels strongly that superintelligence cannot be under the unilateral control of a random CEO. It needs democratic oversight, like the military or nuclear arsenal. He criticizes the internal controls and security of private labs as insufficient for something this powerful.
What about civilian uses? Will they be locked away?
Not forever. He compares it to nuclear energy, aviation, GPS technologies, often developed initially in a defense context that later flourish commercially once the initial security and stabilization phase is over.
But security remains paramount in his view.
Absolutely critical. He repeats the warning. The current path risks the theft of AGI, making U.S. efforts futile and leading to dangerous proliferation. This necessitates deep cooperation with the intelligence community, likely involving significant restrictions on labs and researchers.
He describes the intelligence explosion period as chaotic.
Yes, a fog of war. Rapidly shifting situations, life or death decisions on ambiguous data, immense pressure. Competence will be key.
And the project is needed to navigate that internationally.
Yes, to win the race, prevent theft, and enforce non-proliferation. He sees it as inevitable and argues that getting the government involved earlier is better for security and preparedness. The competence of the project itself becomes crucial. His final timeline. Intelligence explosion underway by 2028-29. Superintelligence summoned by 2030.
Okay. So let's try to wrap up this deep dive into Aschenbrenner's situational awareness. The core message seems to be superintelligence this decade is, in his view, very plausible, and the consequences are, well, enormous. Global security, the future itself.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, and the speed, the scale he's talking about.
Yeah.
It can sound almost outlandish, I think, to people outside that immediate bubble.
It really can, but it's crucial to remember where this is coming from. He's presenting this as the view from inside, from people building the tech, who he claims have had a good track record of seeing what's coming.
Right. It's not just wild speculation. It's an extrapolation based on observed trends and insider knowledge, according to him. Whether that extrapolation holds is the big question, of course.
But the gravity of the potential situation he describes. This isn't just the next iPhone. It's potentially world-altering, presenting challenges unlike anything we've faced. Security, control, global power dynamics.
Absolutely. The urgency he conveys, particularly around security and alignment, is palpable. The need to start grappling with these possibilities now, not when AGI is suddenly knocking at the door.
It definitely leaves you thinking, given this potential for such incredibly rapid transformative change, maybe the most important question for you listening is, what are the conversations we should be having right now as individuals, as societies? How do we even begin to prepare for a future that could look so radically different so soon?
That's the question, isn't it? It certainly demands more thought, more discussion, and a critical look at where this technology might be taking us.